tangu siku hiyo mpaka waleo hakuna hatua imechukuliwa na hatujawasiliana kwa njia yote ile.
We have finished the first piece of our investigation that it was not actually suicide, but it was cold murder.
Inaonekana alipitia mateso kwa sababu alikuwa chafu na amepigwa risasi kutoka hapo chini ya mdomo kapasua mpaka itakatoka kwa kichwa.
Whoever coined the phrase "dead men tell no tales" might as well have been talking about Kenya, because since 1963, too many stories have ended with silence and a corpse. From the mysterious deaths of Temore, George Kinoti, and General Ogola, to the brutal murder of IEBC's Chris Msando, the pattern is chilling. These men died with secrets they were never allowed to reveal. And on 19th of February 2020, another name was added to that list. Detectives at Karura headquarters were investigating a 39 billion Kenya shillings arms scandal that had rocked the office of the deputy president. They were scheduled to question a man who might have been the final piece of the puzzle, Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei, a police officer who had been on duty at the DP's office on the very day the deal was inked. His colleagues had already shown up for questioning, but Kinei never arrived. His phone was off, strange for a man known to be disciplined and responsive, but officers still held out hope. They figured maybe he was running late, maybe there was a family emergency. What they didn't know was that at the very moment they were preparing to interview him, Kinei was already dead. His lifeless body slumped in his tiny bedsitter in Imara Daima, a single bullet to the head. Beside him lay a note. It claimed he had taken his own life, but something about the scene didn't add up. Because just a week earlier, Kinei had thrown a lavish baby shower for his wife. They had just welcomed their newborn. He was planning a wedding, planning a future. Now, he was gone. So what happened to Sergeant Kinei? Was it really suicide? Or was it just another tale silenced too soon? Before we dive into the full details of this disturbing case, thank you for being here. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more dark, investigative stories from Kenya and beyond. As always, this is Shadows of Justice, where we explore crimes that refuse to stay buried. I am Micah Hindi, and remember, dead men might not talk, but their stories still haunt us. Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei wasn't just any officer. He was the head of security at one of the most sensitive offices in Kenya, the Harambe House Annex, the official premises of then Deputy President William Ruto. This wasn't some rural outpost. This was the second highest political office in the land, meaning Kenei's job was simple yet immense. Clear every person who walked through those doors to meet the DP. Whether it was a businessman, a diplomat, or a foreign arms dealer, they had to go through him. And Kinei, he was good at his job. Described as a sharp, level-headed officer, Kinei had worked his way up the ladder from humble beginnings. In 2010, he was just a fresh recruit, an administration police constable posted to the sun-scorched plains of Wajir. It was tough, it was remote, and it wasn't for the faint of heart. But Kinei didn't flinch. Instead, he thrived. And by 2015, he had earned a transfer that will change his life and ultimately end it. But Kinei wasn't all duty and protocol. Off the clock, he was a different man. Online, he was known as Sanzel Santana, or simply Kentos to his friends. A warm soul, always ready with a birthday wish or a laugh over a cold Tusker on a weekend. To those who knew him personally, he wasn't just a cop. He was a good man, a family man looking forward to tying the knot, building a future for his newborn son and rising further in the ranks. But then, in the course of doing his job, Kinei opened the doors to the wrong people. And those doors would never close the same way again, because the scandal that followed was bigger than anyone could ever imagine. To the people of Chemasis village in Nakuru, Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei wasn't just a cop stationed in Nairobi. He was a beacon of hope. A village boy who had made it, yet never fought where he came from. Whenever someone from his community needed help, whether it was navigating a government process or simply needing advice, they turned to Kinei, and he showed up as always. In fact, Kinei was more than just helpful. He was a leader. Literally, he was the chairman of his age group, a highly respected role among the Kalenjin community. Through this, he promoted values of self-growth and responsibility, and he practiced what he preached. By the time he turned 33, Kinei had already built a 3-bedroom house for his young family in Chemasis. He was planning a wedding to formalize his union and just welcomed a newborn son. This wasn't a man unraveling, he was a man building. On Facebook, one of his neighbors, Johnston Kiprono, paid tribute in a heartbreaking post. He described Kinei as a God-fearing, honest, hardworking, brilliant, and a prospective neighbor. He dismissed the idea that Kinei could have taken his own life, calling it impossible. Others agreed. But where did this character come from? The answer lies in Baringo High School, where young Kinei had come under the mentorship of one, Patrick Wanjao, a teacher who saw his potential and took him under his wing. Even after graduating, Kinei never lost his touch. He would often call Mr. Wanjao for guidance before making major life decisions. That mentorship carved him into a man of integrity, a man respected both in the village and in the halls of power. Which is why what happened on February 13, 2020 was so deeply unsettling. Because on that day, the same Kinei, the straight shooter, the rising star, the village pride, was suddenly roped into a fraudulent scheme to con foreign investors 39 billion Kenyan shillings. The plan? A fake tender involving the supply of military-grade firearms and ammunition. And the stage, the office of the Deputy President of Kenya. From that moment on, Kinei stepped into a trap he didn't know he was walking into, and a few days later, he'd be found dead. At the center of the 39 billion Kenyan shillings scam was a man who was no stranger to controversy, former Sports Cabinet Secretary Rashid Echesa. Fresh off a dismissal over corruption allegations, Echesa had rebranded himself into something far more dangerous, a political conman. Masquerading as a personal assistant to the deputy president, Echesa was determined to pull one of the boldest scams in Kenya's recent history. He targeted foreign investors, Polish arms dealers, and lured them with the promise of a lucrative tender to supply military hardware, drones, ammunition, and surveillance equipment. And surprisingly, he succeeded. 13 million shillings exchanged hands, but Echesa wasn't done. To seal the illusion, he needed to prove he had powerful military and political connections. And so, he organized what will be the ultimate performance. A fake meeting inside Harambe House Annex, the official office of the Deputy President William Ruto. But to get inside that fortress of power, he needed help from someone on the inside. Enter Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. As head of security at the DP's office, Kinei's job was to clear all visitors and maintain protocol. That day, a man posing as a senior Kenyan military general showed up early. Kinei, ever the professional, logged him in and let him wait. Minutes later, Rashid Echesa pulled up in his black Range Rover, captured clearly on CCTV. With him were two Polish investors, smartly dressed and carrying high hopes. As seen on surveillance footage, they were welcomed into the lobby, treated with the full decorum of official guests. For 1 hour and 23 minutes, the fake General Echesa and the investors sat inside one of the most secure offices in Kenya, finalizing a fake weapons deal, all under the noses of national security. And then they left. As the elevator doors opened and the three men exited the building, the con seemed complete. But just outside Harambe Annex, detectives pounced. Rashid Echesa was arrested on the spot, right in front of the Deputy President's office, charged with fraud and impersonation. The footage of that day spread like wildfire. It was a national embarrassment because it was a massive scam. Suddenly, everyone who had signed off on that day's guest list came under scrutiny, and Sergeant Kinei. He had unwittingly become the weakest link in the chain, the one person who could explain everything, and 6 days later, he was dead. The media went wild. Front pages screamed scandal at the DP's office again, because this wasn't the first time fraudsters had weaponized the prestige of Harambe Annex. Just months before, another high-level con had rocked the same building. In the now infamous laptop scandal, an investor had lost over 150 million Kenya shillings. The victim, Charles Musinga of Makindu Motors, had been lured into a phantom government deal by a woman introduced to him as Miss Muhoro, supposedly a well-placed operative at the DP's office. She was vouched for one by Agustin Matata, who claimed the tender to supply 2,800 laptops was clean, official, and heavily sanctioned. But it wasn't. The laptops never materialized, the money vanished, and no arrests were made. Now, the fake arms deal hitting headlines barely months later. The coincidence was too loud to ignore. Two mega scams, both executed inside the same government building within a short span, and all while Kenya bled public trust and economic stability. This time, detectives weren't taking chances. They descended on Harambe Annex with a vengeance, reviewing CCTV, checking visitor logs, interviewing staff. The first order of business: find out who had cleared the guests, who opened the door, who watched it all unfold. And Deputy President Ruto wasn't in the office on that day. He was away on official business, which meant only one could give them the real story of what happened inside those walls. Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. February 18, 2020, the DCI had seen enough. A letter had just landed on their desk from Deputy President William Ruto's office, no less, officially complaining about a breach of security protocol at Harambe Annex. The pressure was mounting, and the eyes of the nation were now locked onto the DP's office. That very evening, the DCI summoned all officers attached to Harambe Annex to appear the following day to record official statements. But one man didn't show: Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. His absence raised immediate red flags. This was the head of security, the man closest to the entrance, the first contact for all visitors. He should have been the first in line to speak. Instead, he vanished. In a quick press briefing, the DCI publicly confirmed Kinei's disappearance, assuring the nation that a search was underway. But the optimism was short-lived. That same afternoon, 2 p.m. to be exact, a chilling call reached the police station. A woman from Imara Daima Estate reported a disturbing discovery in her apartment complex, a lifeless body inside a locked bedsitter. When officers arrived and forced entry, the scene confirmed their worst fears. It was Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei. He was lying cold, a single bullet wound to the head. Next to him, a pistol and a handwritten suicide note. But the contents of that note sparked more questions than closure. It was not just a farewell, it was a warning. Kinei wrote of fear that the truth of what happened at the DP's office will endanger his life. He revealed that fraudulent schemes in that office were not new. In fact, he mentioned that the laptop tender victim had previously been threatened by gunmen. If true, that wasn't just about the gun deal anymore. It was a pattern, and now the man who could have broken it was dead. Detectives wasted no time. They knew too well that in high-profile deaths, crime scenes lie, especially when staged to look like suicide. The suicide note found next to Kinei was immediately brought under scrutiny. It began, "I, John Kipyegon Kenei, wait." That was a line that instantly raised eyebrows. To the public, it may have sounded ordinary, but to those who knew the sergeant, it was a red flag. Kinei's real name was actually Arnold Bernard Kipyegon Kenei, not John. His father was the first to call it out. If this was indeed a suicide note, why would a man write the wrong name, especially a name he had never used in his personal or professional life? Was this a deliberate misdirection to alert those to him that he was under duress, or was it simply not written by him at all? To date, no forensic expert has ever confirmed the note's authenticity. With suspicions now swelling, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation took full control of the case. They ordered the local police, who had already transported the body to the mortuary, to return it to the apartment so the crime scene could be reconstructed as it originally was. Every detail, every item, every splatter had to match. The stakes were too high. 2 days before Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei's burial, the then DCI boss, George Kinoti, dropped a bombshell. In a nationally broadcast press conference, Kinoti stated unequivocally, Kenei did not die by suicide. The entire narrative that had dominated headlines for days was false. Kinoti went further. He disbanded the initial investigative team, citing gross inconsistencies and possible tampering. A new team will now handle the case. The announcement outraged Deputy President William Ruto, who accused Kinoti of politicizing Kenei's death and overstepping his mandate. Meanwhile, back in Nakuru, Kenei's father, Mzee Echesa, was grieving a son he barely recognized in that crime scene. According to him, Kinei had twice requested a transfer from the DP's office, claiming tribal discrimination from colleagues who were Nandi, while he was Tugen. Ironically, in Kalenjin, Kenei means the odd one. During his funeral, William Ruto described him as a disciplined, loyal officer, but Mzee Echesa remains haunted, not just by his son's death, but by the silence and lack of justice. The evidence wasn't adding up either. Kinei's body was found in pajamas, but his family says he never owned any, raising the possibility that his actual clothes were removed or discarded. Sources within the DCI quietly suggested he may have been poisoned before being shot, another detail that never made it to public findings. Despite initial promises that those responsible would be unmasked, the investigation went cold. No updates, no arrests, and officials began refusing to speak to journalists on the record. Meanwhile, Deputy President Ruto alleged that Kenei's assassination was politically motivated, a warning shot aimed at him for daring to seek the presidency. Then came another twist. In December 2021, Rashid Echesa, the alleged mastermind of the 39 billion scam, was acquitted. Senior Principal Magistrate Kenneth Cheriot ruled that the prosecution had failed to prove its case, mainly because crucial witnesses like the two Polish businessmen never testified. But in April 2024, that ruling overturned by the High Court. Judge Kinei ruled that magistrate had erred and that Echesa should have been required to defend himself given the strong case laid out by the prosecution. The acquittal, he said, was premature. Still, despite being at the center of one of Kenya's most high-profile scams, Rashid Echesa miraculously found himself back in government. Appointed chair of the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health under President Ruto's administration. His return, alongside other controversial political allies, raised disturbing questions. Was Echesa truly the rogue figure Ruto once distanced himself from, or merely a scapegoat in a larger conspiracy? And most chilling of all, did Kinei have to die to protect something or someone far more powerful? The death of Sergeant Kipyegon Kenei remains one of the most unsettling chapters in Kenya's recent history, not just because of the mystery, but because of the silence that followed it. A young officer, a father, a leader in his village, gone under suspicious circumstances just days before he was to reveal the truth behind a high-level scam. And yet, years later, not a single person had been held accountable. The system he swore to serve not only failed him, it buried him in unanswered questions. When justice is delayed, denied, or manipulated, trust in the system dies with it. And when men like Kinei are silenced, it's not just their lives that are lost. It's the truth they carried and the hope of those they leave behind. As Echesa walks free and rises in public office, and the case grows colder with each passing day, we are left with a haunting reminder. In Kenya, sometimes, the closer you get to power, the more dangerous the truth becomes. Nairobi Insight.